There we go. Turn the camera around. What was I look at first here is a couple of these sheets that I put down to attract things like reptiles in particular. The sheets obviously warm up in the sunshine and provide somewhere that things like that can bask. So we'll have a look underneath this one. Feels a bit chilly, so I'm not expecting a great deal, but we never know. No, there's some ants there. There's a group of ants scurrying away, making their home there, and you see churning the soil up. So we've got some ants. We'll go and have a look at one more of these sheets here. See if anything under this one. So it's not really warm enough for these to work particularly well, but you never know. Yeah, nothing under there. Now we're wandering the woods. Hear the ring-necked parakeets shouting away there. You see lots of blackthorn in flower. This white flower here is the blackthorn, the sloe. Well, the fruit is tend to be called the sloe bush. And the fruit is, of course, used to make a flavouring that goes in gin and makes sloe gin later in the year. But this is one of the early flowering shrubs or trees, if you want. So you get these clouds of white flowers early in spring. And you can see quite a few of them up there, up the path, again of the white bushes. The white plants down here are greater stitchwort. And a lot of them have come out. If you remember, we saw one last week on the broadcast I did here, which I thought was probably the first one I'd seen out. Whereas now, as you can see, there's quite a bank of them, quite a few of them out. So clearly they're much more numerous now, much out in flower. Those are some other plants. And again, this little patch of wood anemone. Rather a nice plant, rather attractive. The buff-tailed bumblebee just flew through the image. One of the queens of that species. The queens basically spend the winter hibernating but coming out on warm days, and then when it gets to spring like today, they're out looking for somewhere to establish their first nest. So we're starting to see lots of the insects waking up now. Quite a few butterflies are around today, whilst a few other insects. And lots of bluebells coming into flower. You can see all the leaves forming the green, but there are quite a few of the flowers now out as well. Nothing like the numbers there'll be in about a few weeks' time as we go into the peak of the season, but you know, little clumps of bluebell like this already coming out, and maybe you can see at the back there a fly feeding on one of them. Not sure what species of fly. A fly visiting presumably to collect some nectar from these flowering bluebells. Lots and lots of these will be coming out. Millions of these will be coming out over the next few weeks here in this site. Stock dove in the background there, sort of hoo hoo type call. There's lots of bird song as well. All the birds are establishing their territories and getting ready Ooh, there's a buzzard just landed in a tree up ahead now. I doubt you're going to see this. He's looking towards us. He might stay there if I go and walk up this other path and let us have a closer view. So buzzards in Britain were a species that had severely declined. They were quite badly affected by the use of various pesticides, which led to a thinning of their eggshells, so that the birds crushed their eggs and couldn't reproduce. With the controlling and phasing out of those pesticides, buzzards are becoming much more common, and I see them pretty frequently around here now. Whereas even 10 years ago, there it goes. You may have just seen it flying through the woods. Now that obviously moved since we first saw it, because that wasn't the tree that landed in that I was keeping my eye on. But they're a species that has become much more prevalent around here compared to what was the case, say, even sort of a decade ago. It would have been worth telling people that we'd seen a buzzard on this site. It's almost expected these days, which is good. Yeah, this is the tree it had dropped into, but it obviously had moved out before we got here. So we'll go a bit further up here instead. And here, a few weeks ago, we had some quite strong winds, and that brought down this rather major limb here, a rather major branch from the ash, which until this fell off the top of it, was the tallest tree in this reserve. It's now lost its top, so it's no longer the tallest. But this came down, was blocking the path, and some of our diligent volunteers came with chainsaws, sectioned it up, moved it off the path, and then we can just leave quite a lot of the wood here to provide habitats for things and to gradually rot down over many years. Get more bluebells. We won't stop for every bluebell we see over here forever, but they are rather attractive flowers. Here, another bumblebee. Let's see if it comes out on camera. It's just scurrying about inside here. It's there now. See if it can come out. I want to see out there. Lost. There we go. So that's buff-tailed bumblebee, or Bombus terrestris, the queen, looking for some food, looking for some nectar, and looking for somewhere where she can form her home, her nest for the year. And what she'll do is she'll produce a little nest, she'll make a few little cells, lay some eggs, and rear those young through. And those young will be females, they'll be sterile females effectively. Be sterile females. They'll be females, they will then become the workers, and they will go out and do all the rest of the foraging and the provisioning for that colony. and then eventually later on she will produce fertile female queens and males, and mating will happen. They'll disperse, they'll mate, and that'll form the colony for the new year, and the newly mated queens will spend the winter waiting to form a new colony, just as that one was doing. Unlike honeybees, the colony doesn't survive over the winter. They produce little amounts of honey, but they don't produce a big store of honey to provision a colony during the cold times when there's no flowers and no nectar. So only the queens survive over winter rather than the whole colony. We will go and have a look at a couple of the ponds, see what they're doing. There's a butterfly flying across. There's a butterfly nearby. Let's see if this stops anywhere we can photograph. You can see it. Several butterflies. Okay, there are several butterflies around here. See if we can get near enough to any of them to have a look. So this is a peacock butterfly perched on a bit of bramble. We're going towards. No, it's just flown. It's been seen off. There's some comma butterflies and some peacock butterflies having a little battle with each other. Just waiting to see if anything settles. Unfortunately, chasing each other rather unhelpfully. But this comma does seem to be liking. So hopefully you can see that orange butterfly there. It's called a comma because on the underside of its hind wing there's a small marking that looks the shape of a comma. And that's part of its camouflage, part of how it disguises itself when its wings are folded up. It just looks like a dried up old leaf with a little crack in it, which is what the comma is. So we'll go and have a look at this pond. There's one pond. This pond's got quite a lot of pondweed on it. Water levels aren't that high in here. And you see the various bits of reed stem just starting to shoot up. Another in pond field, have a look at another pond. They're not massive ponds in here, water features aren't really the major part of this site. Its primary interest is woodland and grassland. But there are a few bits of water in it, and they do add some variety to what's here. Make sure I close the gate behind me. Go. Not too important at the moment because I know that we haven't got the grazing animals in the reserve at the moment that would get out if we left the gate open, but it's still good practice to close gates. So So here's our other pond. Water levels are higher in this one, which is not surprising because we've got the sluices set so that the water is primarily going to this pond at the moment. You can see this pond's got a much more established and mature reed bed. It's obviously last year's reed stems. You can see the base of them though, the green of this year's growth coming away. You hear chiff chaff calling there, that's a 2-note chiff chaff call. Just stopped as I said it, of course. Just going to quickly check up this side. This is essentially where the pond, when it reaches its banks, overflows. It's lower than it has been, the water levels there. I could walk across there if I wanted to. No particular need to do that today, don't think. You see here quite a lot of the bluebells are out now. Starting to get that, something of that carpet of blue effect. Still quite a few more to open here. But this little patch was where the first one was seen in flower this year. And attractive. Rather an attractive display of blue there. Sun's rather gone off them. There was quite a few insects feeding on this earlier when it was in bright sunlight. Much less now. We're coming down into a sunnier patch again, so see what there is to see. There's some bees, I think. There's a hoverfly on this bluebell leaf. Let me zoom in. I'm not going to attempt to identify it on screen, but it's a hoverfly of some kind. There you can hopefully see it hovering, hence the name. Cut back into the woodland now, a bit more shade. We'll see what else there is to see as we go through. another path now. Wondering. So what we've got here, almost certainly impossible to see at this distance on the screen, is one of our trail cameras. Basically remote cameras that are triggered by infrared sensor and are triggered by things passing through it. And they allow us to monitor what's going on here when we're not about. Keep an eye on any wildlife that might be using the area. So I'm going to have a quick check that the batteries are still going on this, because if not I'll have to replace them. Just open it up, quickly flick it into mode. Yeah, it's coming on, that's encouraging. It suggests, yeah, and it suggests there's been some wildlife. So I'm not going to go through the images now. I'm going to do that a bit later on, properly on the computer. So just checking for today that the batteries were still working, which they were. More expensive versions of those cameras have little Bluetooth or Wi-Fi connections on, so you can interrogate them without having to go up to them. And well, at the moment we don't use that design, we use those ones, which are more manual but cheaper. That's fine for here. This is a site that's not massive, has human access, so you're not really causing a lot of extra disturbance by going and very briefly checking the camera. In other places, of course, you'd want to use things that involve less interaction. Nice clump of wild garlic there. And big old cherry tree of some kind. We'll wander through the paddock today, I think. Wander back down through the grassy area. Do a bit in the woodland. So we'll go down through here, back towards one of the ponds. See if anything's about in the meadows. Right, you can see the ground is still, you probably could see the ground is still pretty muddy. If I could get the camera to behave itself. There's been quite a bit of water down. And this side does stay quite wet on the surface. You see lots of that white blackthorn flower along the hedges on both sides of the paddock. And you see piles of the scrub where we've been clearing away bramble encroachment in the reserve. So if you didn't manage grassland like this in some way, it would eventually turn into woodland. We manage it by a combination of human action, mechanical cutting, and grazing animals, just to give us, to keep the habitat diversity, keep the open grassland habitat. currently lack the ability to zoom on this device, so I can't really. There are quite a few birds flitting over. If we were zoomed in, we have a chance of seeing them, but there's quite a few small birds flying across the meadow, probably mainly blue tits and grey tits and robins and things like that. And some gulls flying. There's a bird of prey just gone out here. It's a kestrel. So as we walk towards it, it may well fly again. If you keep an eye on the tree line to the right, this kestrel may fly. I'm not going to try and not disturb it. I'm not going to walk too close to where it is, but it may choose to fly out simply because there's a person here in the meadow and it's not likely to be able to hunt effectively when I'm around, so it may choose to move if it sees me getting too close. There it goes. And you can hear all the other birds alarm calling as that went over, sort of shouting, hey, there's a predatory thing about, pay attention. It's often a way that you pick up where predatory birds are. You will hear the other birds who've got much more incentive than I to see them. I just fail to see something I might find interesting. If I don't see a predator, they might get eaten. So they're really invested in it, and that loud alarming that you get often tells you there's something about. That was a kestrel. Commonest raptor I would say we have here. Sparrowhawk being the second commonest. And these days, I suppose, red kite and buzzard would probably be in third and fourth place these days. We'll go over to the pond here, and then we'll probably end having a look onto the pond. It's getting to about 4:30, so I'm going to have a quick cup of tea and have bluebell centre down there, and then I'm going to head home and start cooking my dinner. You've got a pond here. There should be a lot of tadpoles in here. There was a heron earlier on today, large water bird that was sitting here and just eating away, pulling out groups of these tadpoles, grouping them together, and just feed on all the abundant protein that's provided. There's another group of them there. You see them agitating the water surface. So let's go in there. And maybe that group of tadpoles is as good a place as any to end on.